Thank you. Well, the fall season in Ann Arbor has not really begun until we all gather in the backyard of Wallace House to welcome our new fellows and to hear the Hovey Lecture. These are always such stimulating talks, and I do remember sitting actually right here last year listening to Molly and thinking for the first time that Donald Trump could win. She's really the person who opened my eyes to that, and I know that today's talk from Alex is going to be terrific and help us understand the rest of the story. But first, I have the pleasure on behalf of President Mark Schlissel and our Board of Regents and our entire university community to extend a warm welcome to our new class of Knight-Wallace Fellows in the 200th fall season of the University of Michigan. And as for a community of activities and experiences, let me just say, we invite you to everything. Our classes, our libraries, our museums, our laboratories, our sports competitions, our arboretum, our biological station, our faculty offices, by appointment, of course. These are all open to you, and we are confident that you will take advantage of it, and then we will be the richer for it. And then finally, regarding a community of feeling, well, as the Supremes sang, you can't hurry love. But I will wager that before the end of your fellowship, you will share our love, or at least a deep fondness, for Wallace House, for your fellow fellows, for my hometown of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and, of course, for the University of Michigan. And we'll know if you do, because when you see a stranger with a block M, you will spontaneously yell, "Go Blue!" That will be the test.
Sometimes it's just apparent, the conversation we should be having. And this year, I knew that Alec was the person who should come to talk with us this year for the Hovey Lecture. One of the things that's been a constant refrain over the past year as people have tried to make sense of everything that's happened before November and after, there's been a refrain of, oh, if the media would only have, well, if they had only covered. Journalists never told us about that. They didn't cover this. They didn't go there. And with the way we all get information today, I think I understand why people can reach that conclusion. We have so much information coming to us from so many different directions at such a great speed that it's hard to keep up. And certainly there are people who want to keep us all confused about the information pipeline. But in fact, we know, those of us in the field and those of us who consume a lot of journalism, that in fact this work was being done. There were journalists from a range of news organizations, large and small, traditional and digital, all over the country, telling the stories of the people who were voters and citizens and non-citizens and worried members of society before this election, and Alec MacGillis was one of them. Alec MacGillis is a political reporter for ProPublica, and he's a 2011 Knight-Wallace Fellow, as I mentioned before. His reporting of blue-collar voters before and around the time of the 2016 election was really part of the national conversation. The quality and range of his work earned him the 2017 Polk Award for National Reporting, which is one of the highest prizes in journalism. Also, the 2017 Scripps Howard Award, and he's also the recipient of the Toner Prize for Excellence in Political Reporting.
When Lynette asked me about speaking here, I got to admit that I was initially a little hesitant. It was an incredible honor, but I was definitely a little bit hesitant. Like most reporters, I do prefer asking questions to giving answers. And in fact, as my fellow class of 2011 fellows know, I really like asking questions. I got a rap that year for being the guy who was always asking the prickly question at the end of events in ways that probably caused some discomfort for some of our esteemed visitors to the Wallace House and our even more esteemed hosts in Turkey, Argentina, and Brazil. If Charles were here, I would apologize directly to him for that, but Julia, perhaps you can carry that back to him. Okay. But I did decide to accept the invitation regardless out of my deep gratitude for this program. It's a total cliche to say this, but the Wallace House really did change my life. For one thing, were it not for this program, I would never have encountered Torrontés wine, which we had on offer here a lot when I was here, and it's delicious. Argentine varietal. But seriously, my time here was so fulfilling that it really did convince me that I needed to make my life more like the Knight-Wallace, to make my job more like the Knight-Wallace, to find a way to take a more expansive, less news cycle-driven approach to journalism. And so some months after finishing here, I made a big switch. I left the Washington Post to go to the New Republic, leaving a big newspaper for a small magazine. In the process, taking a big pay cut and giving up a lot of professional stability. But it was definitely the right move. I really was meant to work in magazine journalism. As Alberto just said, I'm all for the 10,000 word piece. That's how I roll. So it's been great to be in that mode, and that would not have happened without this program. The year here also persuaded my wife and me to make a big life decision and move our family from Washington, where we'd been living, to Baltimore. We really wanted to replicate something like we enjoyed for a year here in Burns Park, a community of simpatico people and great porches at a remove from the whole Washington, New York maw. And where we live in Baltimore is without the weeknight keggers and actual firecracker displays that we had around the corner from us on South Forest. Though we did get revenge for those every Sunday morning at 8 in the morning. My sons and I would go out and play ball in the street, and the students did not care for that. Finally, the year here introduced me to a whole new set of truly great friends, some of whom are here today, which means a lot for me. One of them bears naming in particular. Matt Power was the only magazine writer in our group, and he very much helped coax me into making the jump into that realm. As some of you know, we lost Matt just 3 years after the fellowship in a tragic accident while he was on assignment for a story in East Africa. He was a wonderful writer, and as all in our class quickly came to realize, a truly, truly wonderful man. He and his wife, Jess Banco, a talented journalist in her own right, are never far from my thoughts. The last time I was under a big tent like this one was the spring before last at my 20th college reunion. There was, of course, a lot of talking and joking about the presidential campaign, which was just then heading into the general election. And I remember being in that tent and looking out over the hundreds of people who were there and thinking there might not be a single person here who is going to vote for Donald Trump. Really, quite possibly, not a single one. But I was spending a lot of time in other places last year, and so I knew that there were other people that Trump was doing a lot better with. And that's what I'm going to talk about here today, the gaps between places, which have been growing a lot in recent years, and which I believe explain a lot about what's been happening in this country. First, though, I'm going to talk about a couple people. One is a woman called Tracy. I met Tracy when I was out canvassing, or out with some women who were canvassing for Trump in a working class suburb of Dayton called Miamisburg. They were from Buffalo, and they'd come all the way to canvass for Trump there. And they were at one house, a sort of somewhat rundown house in Miamisburg, and a woman called Tracy came out to the porch to speak with them. They started to tell her about, make their pitch about Trump and talk about how he was going to make America great again and bring back all the jobs. And Tracy kind of cut them off and started telling them that she had, in fact, helped dismantle one of the big auto plants in Dayton as part of her job in heavy construction. And as she started telling them this, she started to cry, like to weep, relating this experience. And that kind of struck me. And so I circled back to her afterward, and we ended up having a very long talk in her kitchen. And I've stayed in touch with her since then, and I've actually seen her twice since then. And here's the deal with Tracy. Everything about her would make you think that she'd voted for Hillary. She was raised in a Democratic family. She's a single mom with 3 daughters. She belongs to a union, the operating engineers. She's been constantly harassed and discriminated against on the job. Very male-heavy job. She voted for Obama in 2008. She broke up with her boyfriend recently when she heard him refer to one of her coworkers with the N-word. But it turns out she couldn't stand Hillary. Here's what she had to say about Hillary. To have lives be sacrificed because of corporate greed and warmongering, it's just too much for me. And I realize I don't have all the facts, but there's just too much sidestepping on her. I don't trust her. I don't think that... I know there's casualties of war and conflict. I'm a big girl. I know that. But I live my life with no secrets. There's no shame in the truth. There's mistakes made. We all grow. She's a mature woman, and she should know that. You don't email your effing daughter when you're a leader. Leaders need to make decisions. They need to be focused. You don't hide stuff. Good luck parsing that. It's all mixed in there. Benghazi, the emails, the Wall Street speeches. Here's another person I met more recently when I was reporting the aforementioned piece this year on Jared Kushner's apartment complexes in the declining inner-ring suburbs of Baltimore. His name's Tommy, and he's a handyman who's in the middle of a divorce and has just gotten custody of his 2 kids. And he also has good reason not to support Trump, because he and many of his neighbors are being black and white and Hispanic, all very diverse population in these complexes, are being screwed by Trump's son-in-law, who also happens to be one of Trump's top advisors. Their rentals are in lousy shape, and they're constantly being hit with late fees and court fees and taken to court for back rent and broken leases, even when they're in the right. When I met Tommy, he had just found another court notice from his landlord tacked on his front door, and he was sitting in his pickup truck reading the Bible to himself, girding himself for a visit to traffic court. But even after he figured out who his landlord actually was, after I told him, Tommy was still totally for Trump. I asked him why he liked him so much, and here's what he said. I know the Democrats lately, they've been pretty dirty, filthy dirty. Hillary Clinton being involved with Benghazi, allowing them soldiers to be murdered, which I thought was disgusting, and with the attack by Obama on conservative groups, and the fact that a repairman, an electrician, went to one of Hillary Clinton's places to work on it in a storage area and found thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of votes of people who are dead, non-existent, made-up votes. And I was like, are you serious? That really chased me away from her. So here's why I'm quoting these 2 people out of the many I've spoken with in recent years. Tracy and Tommy do not live in deepest red America. They don't live in the deep south or Appalachia. They live on the edge of cities that not all that long ago were some of our proudest and most prosperous. The Wright brothers, H.L. Mencken, National Cash Register, Delco, Beth Steel, General Motors. But both cities have fallen quite a ways. Dayton's population's fallen by nearly half, Baltimore's by more than a third. Both cities still have plenty going for them, and I find them both fascinating and appealing, but they and many places like them have been left behind. Not coincidentally, both cities now rank near the very top in the country for fatal opiate overdoses. I've been thinking a lot about these left behind places the past few years. When I was here for the fellowship, my study area was income inequality. That seems awfully unoriginal now. But if you can believe it, there were a bunch of times where I get up to say what my study area was, as Charles had us doing like every day, several times a day. And people, when I would say this, would get confused, would seem confused, like they'd never heard of it. Sometimes they'd mistake it. Sometimes they'd say, "What are you talking? Income quality? What's that? Income quality?" I said, "No, income inequality." They're like, "Oh, what's that?" Well, it's this problem we have, like the 1%. But now, 6 years later, everyone's talking about that. But in the past couple of years, I've come around to thinking that the issue that really matters is the gap, not just between people, but the gap between places. There's always been richer and poorer places, of course, but the gap has gotten a lot bigger, and the winner places have increasingly concentrated on the coasts. In the mid-'60s, the country's 25 richest metro areas included Milwaukee, Des Moines, Cleveland, and Rockford, Illinois, 25 richest metro areas in the country. In 1966, the per capita income of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where General Mills cereal is based, was only $87 less than that of Metro New York. Here are some other stats. In 1980, the per capita income of Washington, D.C. was 29% above the average for all Americans. By 2013, after the boom in lobbying and the whole Homeland Security industrial complex, it was 68% above. In the Bay Area, the difference went from 50% above in 1980 to 88% above. It's been most dramatic in New York, thanks to the growth of the financial sector, from 80% above the national average in 1980 to 172% above now. The gaps are growing wider at the bottom end, too. My hometown, Pittsfield, Mass., hometown also of one of the new fellows, was for most of the 20th century a thriving small city with a strong middle class, thanks in large part to the big GE plant in town. GE's gone, and Pittsfield's median income, per capita income, has now fallen to 40% below the state average, light years behind Boston. I'm going to talk about this gap through 3 different perspectives: economics, the media, and politics. First, economics. What's driving this gap? The winter cities are getting so damn expensive that you'd expect there to be some kind of correction, a dispersal to more affordable places. But that's not what's happening. Instead, there's a winner-take-all, rich-get-richer effect. GE just moved its headquarters to Boston. Aetna's leaving Hartford for New York. Caterpillar's leaving Peoria for Chicago. I'm still trying to figure out what's driving this clustering, but it seems like there are a couple main aspects to it. There's a professional aspect. The less that we can expect to be with one company our whole life, the more it makes sense to go somewhere where if that one job doesn't work out, you can easily get another one in your field. If you're in biotech, it makes more sense to be in Boston than to go for that one intriguing job you saw in Buffalo. That quest for security is now made double by the rise of the 2-income professional couple. You understandably want to be somewhere where both of you can hope to get good jobs. And companies, in turn, are better off being in those winner-take-all cities to get that top talent, even if it costs them somewhat more. Meanwhile, studies show that we're increasingly clustering by income even within certain cities. The share of wealthy families that now live in wealthy neighborhoods instead of in mixed-income neighborhoods has doubled since 1980. That is, the most successful among us seem to find comfort and security by being among other very successful people. You could call it, or I call it, the Bethesda effect. People are so eager to live in that Washington suburb that they're now, I saw this in the Post a few weeks ago, they're now buying condos in former office parks. Like, they take office parks and convert them into condos. And people pay a lot of money for them. I heard recently about a high school baseball team where this is related firsthand. This is not urban myth, firsthand. Where the fans of the Bethesda team were taunting the fans of the Silver Spring team by shouting, "Higher average income, higher average income." Yeah, it's charming, right? So this could also help explain why you're seeing a winner-take-all effect among cities, people wanting to be where the other winners are. But another reason why so much wealth is concentrating in certain places is that so much wealth is concentrating in certain companies based in certain places. Take retail. Profits used to flow to all sorts of retail stores and chains, big and small, all over the country. Now they're increasingly flowing to a single company, which is based in Seattle, which just happens to be experiencing the biggest spike in home values in the country the last year or two. Amazon now occupies 19% of all the office space in Seattle. That's a bigger share than any company in any city in the country. They have 24 coffee shops for their employees across their campus there. They even just built a few biospheres on their campus, just for the heck of it. Of course, hearing that I was going to be speaking on this problem, Amazon announced last week that it will bestow a second headquarters on some lucky city. That's good to hear, I guess, but it will only spread the wealth so far. And a lot of the cities that are being discussed as likely candidates for that second headquarters are also winner cities, like Boston and Metro DC. The same thing's happening, of course, in our own business. Ad revenue used to flow to newspapers all over the country. Now, a majority of digital ad revenue and every single dollar of new digital ad revenue is flowing to 2 companies in the Bay Area, Google and Facebook, which reported a combined $35 billion in revenue last quarter. What neither of these companies do is actually cover the news. The good thing, though, is that more and more people are starting to think about this problem of market concentration, in ways that we can rethink our antitrust system to deal with it. Some of these people worked at a think tank in Washington that gets a lot of money from Google. As you may have heard, just 2 weeks ago, that think tank cut them loose. Of course, the concentration of media money in certain places is not just bad because it fuels regional inequality, but because it fuels news voids, which brings me to the second prong of the gap. Over the past decade, the number of reporting jobs around the country, newspaper jobs, has fallen by 12,000. 1 out of every 4 newspaper jobs has vanished over the past decade. And those numbers are actually a little bit old. It's probably even worse. Over that same period, past decade, the number of reporters in Washington has doubled. Look at it another way. As online media jobs have replaced print jobs, 73%, nearly 3/4 of all internet publishing jobs are now on either the Acela Corridor or the West Coast. You've seen those pictures of packs of reporters swarming after congressmen on Capitol Hill. Those packs just seem to get bigger and bigger. Well, contrast that with what you see in a lot of the state houses around the country, like the one I worked at in Concord, New Hampshire, which really are virtually empty now. Why does this matter? Well, because in all sorts of places, we're missing the story. Take the Flint water scandal. There were several local and state reporters who did amazing yeoman's work to expose that crisis, but it did not get the sustained scrutiny it deserved early enough, which might have actually prevented some of the public health toll. Or take Baltimore, where I live. It drives me crazy, it really drives me crazy, to see how many big stories are not getting the attention they deserve in that city, because my former paper, The Sun, is so depleted, and it was just announced that the alt weekly in town is being shut down. We're having our worst year for homicides ever in Baltimore this year, like worse than the crack era, worse than the wire years. We are also, with so much going on. We have a big federal consent decree coming down from the federal government for our police department. We have a huge corruption scandal in our police department right now. Under Armour is building a massive city within a city with unprecedented public subsidies. The very good reporters left at the Sun can only get to so much of that. If we're lucky, someone parachutes in from the Post or the Times, but a lot of the time it feels like we're invisible. Like when people in New York or Washington talk about how violent crime is way down these days, to the point where there's a bar that just opened up in Brooklyn with fake bullet holes in the wall to conjure the bad old days, the cool bad old days. Well, in my city, the bullet holes are very much still real. But the coverage gap has political consequences too. First of all, it's a lot easier to hate the media if you don't know anyone in the media. If you don't see hardworking reporters at your town hall or the courthouse or the school board or the high school football game, the media to you means something completely foreign. It's just Wolf and Anderson and the pundits and those guys who come to town with the candidate or president and are penned in the back of the room. And so when the candidate or president, not naming names, but when the candidate or president starts railing against the media, you turn around and glare at them because you have no idea who they are. They're just these strangers with nice clothes and sharp glasses. Most of all, though, there's the basic fact that if you don't have local news, it is going to affect your politics, whether and how you vote. It's going to make you feel more disconnected from any kind of civic or community fabric. It's going to make you feel more isolated. And it's going to send you in search of information elsewhere. Take Tracy. She does not get the Dayton Daily News. She doesn't have cable. She goes online for her news. She surfs around, and she gets a lot of her news from Facebook. When the Trump campaign and the Russians and whoever else were sending out their anti-Hillary stuff on Facebook, which was really lucrative for Facebook, it was hitting its intended target in Tracy, a swing voter in a swing state. And here's the poignant thing. Tracy herself is aware what an easy mark she was, how shaky her information sources are. No one that's voting knows all the facts, she told me that first day we met. It's a shame. They keep us so effing busy and poor that we don't have the time. And this brings me to the third prong of the gap, third and final prong, the political map. It so happens that most of the winner-take-all cities are now overwhelmingly Democratic. That's partly because cities are in general more racially diverse and racial minorities vote heavily Democratic. But it's also because upper middle class professionals are now voting increasingly Democratic. And so to the extent that those people are now clustering in certain winner-take-all places and regions, those places are getting really, really blue. This is a real problem for the Democrats, because given out how our political system works. If the 58 million people who live in California and New York get the same number of senators as the 1.5 million people who live in the two Dakotas, which is how our system works, it's really not helpful to have more and more of your voters in Brooklyn and the Bay Area. The Electoral College is somewhat more equitable, but it's still possible, as we now know, to win by 3 million votes and still lose if too many of those votes are in California instead of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. It hurts in the House and state legislatures, too. Yes, you can blame gerrymandering, but even if you drew more nonpartisan lines, the Democrats would probably still come out on the short end because so many of their votes are clustered in Milwaukee and Madison, Philly and Pittsburgh, or Detroit and Ann Arbor. But the gap hurts the Democrats in another way, too. If the winner-take-all places are increasingly, or almost entirely deep blue, if the Democratic Party is now identified with those thriving cosmopolitan places, it's entirely predictable that people in the left-behind places, even ones that used to vote Democratic, will take their envy or resentment out on that party. Now, none of this is to imply that regional disparity and resentment was the only factor driving that election. I heard way too many people, including Obama voters, ranting to me about crooked Hillary or Syrian refugees or especially Black Lives Matter to believe that. I really do believe, though, that regional resentment is driving a lot of, regional inequality is fueling a lot of those other resentments as well. But we shouldn't worry about it just because of how it's affecting our elections. We should worry about it because of how it's affecting us and the way we live with one another. It's a lot harder to understand the problems affecting other Americans if you're really removed from those troubles, to understand the opiate epidemic, or the rise of contingent jobs, or the breakdown of family and community. It's also a lot easier to be blind to all the ways that your own advantages have benefited you, in all the ways that you may be exacerbating the gap, knowingly or unknowingly, to preserve those advantages. When you're lucky enough to be in one of those prosperous blue islands, it's awfully easy to get lost in it, whether it's in Brooklyn or Bethesda or, yes, Ann Arbor. I remember well from my year here that it was all so glorious, so idyllic, that it was hard to believe that Detroit was just 40 miles away. Never mind the town that's 40 miles the other way, Jackson. Its population's down 40% from its peak. Hillary Clinton got 10 percentage points less in Jackson County, than Obama did in 2012. Her drop-off in votes in that one county amounted to half her losing margin in this state. I don't think I heard Jackson mentioned once my whole time here. But Jackson matters. Dayton matters. Pittsfield matters. Baltimore matters. Places matter. Thank you.
So it's perfectly clear why Alec was the person to give this talk this year. Thank you so much. We're going to open it up for questions, and we've got microphones on both sides. If you raise your hand, we'll bring a mic to you, and we'd ask that because we do have a wonderful crowd here, if we can keep the questions direct and brief so that we can get as many questions in and time for answers and conversation as possible.
So just point to someone.
Oh, sure. And it's okay to make them prickly because, taste of my own medicine. So. Oh, right.
Alec, thanks for a great talk. I was wondering if you have a theory or an opinion about the connection between the successful areas of urban centers and the people in the more rural areas who are suffering. The jobs in auto plants are not moving to the urban centers. So I think, what would you tell someone from an urban center sort of how their success affects those rural areas and what they could do, anything specific that could help?
It's a good question. There's a new book out that actually addresses this very question, and I've only just started it, but I definitely want to finish it. And it's called Dream Hoarders by Richard Reeves, and it's basically about all the ways that the upper middle class. The book is really about the top 20%, not really the top 1%. He argues that the top 20% are just as much of a problem as the top 1%, and all the ways the top 20% are knowingly or unknowingly kind of hoarding opportunity, and it's all sorts of things he mentions. One example he gives is the ways that we've made our cities so expensive to live in, and it's harder. People say, well, why can't these folks in these struggling places just move to where the jobs are, move to where the opportunity is? Well, there's lots of reasons why it's hard to do that. You have family, you don't want to leave it behind. You love where you live. You love the hills. Your mother provides daycare for your kids, and you're a single mom, so where else are you going to get daycare? But it's also because these cities are so damn expensive that it's hard to break into them. And imagine just showing up in San Francisco now as like a single mom with 3 kids in tow. Like, where are you going to live? And so he argues that one thing the cities have done is make themselves so especially expensive through their through NIMBYism, through their zoning practices. That's just one small example he gives. Another example is all the ways that we hoard educational opportunity, and legacy admissions, the sort of whole just insane college prep business that we engage in more and more and more. The way that certain policies that benefit the upper middle class are fiercely defended when they come up for any kind of debate, such as the mortgage interest reduction or the 527 plans, which I'm sure many people in this tent have, including myself, to save for college. When the 527 plans, which are heavily regressive in terms of who's using them and getting that tax break, when that came up like a year or two late in the Obama years as a possible something to get rid of, there was a huge uproar from that top 20%, and that idea went nowhere. So there are these things that we knowingly or unknowingly are sort of complicit in. Beyond that, I would say that it is not just about making those specific connections, but also about I think just opening your eyes a little bit, and I know empathy has become kind of a loaded word right now because of the debates after the election, and I really do not believe that empathy excuses all, and empathy, there are limits to empathy, but part of it is just opening your eyes to what is going on in these places, because many people just don't see them, don't go through them, and it's really bleak out there. And right now pick your place, Southwest Ohio. I don't know if any of you saw the series that just came out in the Cincinnati Enquirer. This amazing project they did documenting 1 week of the opioid crisis in the Cincinnati area. It's mind-blowing. Drug overdoses have gone up 10 times what they were in 15 years ago in Ohio, in the entire state of Ohio, 10 times. So I think it's both seeing those specific things, but also making just kind of a broader imagination where you to sort of put yourself, and again, this is not just about the white working class. This is also, Dayton's like 40% African American, Baltimore 63% African American. And we're 40 miles from Washington. but it really just often feels like people in Washington have no clue what's going on up there. Yeah.
Hi. I'm just curious to know thank you. What happens in all of those areas when the things they vote for don't produce the results that they want? Because either nothing gets done in Washington for them, or the things that are being prescribed as the solutions we know are not the solutions. They're not going to bring the coal jobs back. They're not going to revive the family farm. They're not going to do all these things that Donald Trump and many Republicans have said they will do. And the reason I ask this is because you look at some of these deep red parts of the South, which are always at the bottom of the list. Yeah. They're always have the worst education, the worst environment, the worst everything, and they still, it's been decades, they still vote for the same Republican leaders, even it's often the same people. So what happens when they don't get what they want in the current era? The people who voted for Trump and don't get their wall, they end up with an immigration compromise. The economy is whatever it is. I mean, what happens then?
Well, we'll see, right? We'll see next year, and next year is going to be a huge year. I mean, that what happens in that midterm is kind of everything right now. But I got to say, I think for a lot of people, it doesn't matter that much if they don't get the wall. It doesn't matter that much if the factory doesn't come back. There was such, for a lot of these voters, including Tracy, there was such profound glee and sort of just vindication simply in the win itself. It was just so, it was just delirious. Like, oh my gosh, we actually matter. There are that many of us out there. No one said we could do it, and we did it. That high lasts a long time. And then also that sense of that resentment and alienation toward, the Democrats, or what they see the Democrats now being, and these sort of places that the Democrats are sort of concentrated. That resentment can carry you a long time too, as just that kind of cultural anger that can carry you through a fair amount of disappointments, policy-wise. That's not to say that things can't swing back somewhat. On this point though, I had a piece that came out a couple years ago that directly addressed the age-old question: why are they voting against their interests? And I proposed sort of a slightly different theory of it, which is that the people in a lot of these places who are most dependent on the safety net, on democratic programs, whether it's food stamps or disability or other programs that a lot of these places rely on very heavily. And you always think, well, how can these places like West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, how can these places now be going red if people depend on so much on these programs that are going to get eviscerated by Republicans? Well, my theory was that basically that we have to keep in mind that who's actually voting. A lot of the people in these places who are most dependent on these programs are not voting. The levels of non-voting among not just the poor, but in these places, the white poor, are astronomically high. The levels of non-voting are actually higher among the white poor than among low-income African Americans in cities. And the people who are voting more and more Republican in these places are the people who are just a step or two up the ladder. Trump's highest share of the white vote was 50 to 100,000 in family income. His lowest was above that, but his highest was 50 to 100,000. And so it's people who are living in places that are becoming more and more depressed, more and more dependent on help, and are resentful of that. And are resentful of the growing dependency around them. You're seeing all these people that are getting help around you, and who you think should be working. Look, there's Jimmy. He's getting SSI, but he's going fishing every day, and you see this stuff all around you, and a lot of course, anti-welfare resentment in this country has deep racial roots. It's the welfare queen of Reagan's telling, but in fact, a lot of these places, the anti-welfare resentment is also just against people who look like you. They might even be your own family. It's your cousin who's blowing his whatever payments he's getting on Oxy, and And it creates this huge resentment. As this dependency grows, it just, but it really hits, where it hits is those people who are just a notch or two up the ladder, who see this around them, and they're like, that's why Maine, for instance, Maine is like almost entirely white, has really high rates of dependency on the various programs. And they've elected this guy, Paul LePage, for 2 terms now, whose whole entire message is anti-welfare. And they're virtually everyone in Maine who's on welfare is white. And that's the resentment is toward that as well as toward the sort of unseen urban taker.
Did you call up someone?
Martha, Rena right here.
Thank you. About 50 years ago, I wrote and published an article called Place Prosperity versus People Prosperity. And I came down solidly on the side of people prosperity and said, well, if the place is not doing well, the people can
Get
always
people out,
move
right.
to where it is doing well. And you've made a very persuasive case that place prosperity does matter. But what you haven't talked about, except in passing, was what kind of measures could alleviate this. You mentioned gerrymandering, but you, like most observers, say this is a rather small part of the problem that people tend to cluster anyway.
Right.
So, is there
Yes.
any light at the end of this tunnel?
So there are a couple things you could do. One, I really believe, is to bust up the giants. You have to bust up the giants. You have to bust up, the tech giants. It's a real problem. Like I said, the media money is all now, that money used to be everywhere. It was here, it was everywhere. And it's flowing now to these 2 companies, which are more money than God. Same with retail. It's flowing to this more and more and more to this one company. We have to figure that out. I've got one of my former colleagues at the New Republic has a new book out now, just came out this week. Frank Foer, brilliant guy, has a new book out about this whole problem, taking on the tech giants and how it's this existential threat to our country. Then a more simple thing is in the case of Washington. The wealth in Washington is just, Washington's now got 6 of the 10 wealthiest counties in Metro Washington. Fairfax, Montgomery, Howard, they're all the richest. One thing I proposed some years ago when I first started thinking about this problem is, and this is maybe a little bit simplistic, but is to spread the federal government out more. And we have the CDC in Atlanta. There's no reason we have some, FBI's got a lot of back office stuff in West Virginia. You could maybe try to move some more stuff out these days. We've got video conferencing. Everyone doesn't have to be in the same place. That's just one thought. I'm not totally opposed to the people-based idea. Like, I totally see why we also need to make it more possible for people to get to places of opportunity. But what I worry about is sort of where do you draw the line? It's one thing to say that some really dying coal town in eastern Kentucky, just like what's the future for that? There's no more resource. It's just gone. It's almost at the level of like a silver town in Nevada, like a true ghost town, right? And it's hard to see what's going to replace that. But where are you going to draw the line? Like, is all of southeastern Ohio like considered no longer a place with a future? So, but maybe southwestern Ohio too. Like, pretty soon you're like gobbling up a big part of a really important state in our country. They can't all go to Fairfax. Oh.
Why don't you take one
Why
there?
don't we go over here just because
Yeah.
I fell off.
So, as a reporter who hasn't lived in New York for 18 years, and whose newspaper is not holding her job, I am painfully aware of the concentration of media jobs in DC and New York, and the number of national outlets that require their people to be in New York or DC or very occasionally San Francisco or Los Angeles for like really no understandable reason. With the election, are you seeing any changes in the people who run these outlets about where they're allowing their reporters to live?
I'm seeing a little bit of it. You're seeing a little bit of it at the elite publications, like the Times and the Post are letting more people just be out around the country, which is good. There's been a big step forward in this direction. My organization, to its great credit, it has just opened a new branch in Illinois, in Chicago. It's going to be like Illinois ProPublica, and my great hope is that that can become a model for more and more of those kind of operations that are based in certain places, underserved places, and because it's just so important to be on the ground. I mean, we can do all the parachuting we want. You know, I do my parachuting, but you have to have someone setting up that first flare that there's a problem here. You know, the way that happened in Flint, like there's a flare that went up. There was not enough of a response to that flare. But so I really hope that ProPublica's model can succeed. It will succeed partly if we, have the resources to do it, and ProPublica is a nonprofit and it's supported by generous donors. So, yeah.
Two more questions.
As a former businessman and at times a journalist, one issue that really concerns me is the decline of ethics. It seems that we've grown into a society that is no harm, no foul. And the primary example of this to me is the fetish that colleges have with the survey results of U.S. News and World Report, which, upon close scrutiny, are the most unscientific surveys that are given incredible credibility. Now, I mentioned this to an official of the University of Michigan, and he said to me, and I quote, "Is it causing any harm?" I said, "You mean, is anyone being physically hurt by this information not being true?" No one's physically hurt by it. Well, then, if it helps the university look better, I see no problem with it. Now, I want to tell you, friends, that goes against every sort of ethic that I have ever followed in my being raised in this community and attending the University of Michigan.
Yeah, so two quick things to that. First, you've touched on something that, to me, was the core of the Kushnerville piece, which is that some of our inequality in this country, including this regional inequality, is not just based on larger forces, globalization, technology, and all that. It's based on people at the top behaving very badly and doing specific things that are actually hurting people at the bottom and actually making a lot of money off of people at the bottom, which was sort of the message of that great book, Evicted, by Matt Desmond, saying that it's not just that the poor are poor, it's that the rich are making a lot of money off the poor. So there is an ethical matter here. On the college issue, I saw this really depressing stat recently that big survey by Pew, or one of the big guys, showing that the faith in college as a way forward, as a path to opportunity, they did ask everyone, do you believe in college as a path to opportunity? Is it worth it, basically? And the huge plunge in the number of non-college whites saying that it's worth it. Everyone else was kind of steady, but there's just been a real collapse in confidence in education as a way forward among this, much debated sector, and that's really, not good. And I am constantly depressed when I see, and I'm not naming any names here, it goes across the board, but when you see how low the rates at a lot of our universities, including big public universities, are for people lower down the income ladder, and it's just a huge problem. The search for prestige and that sort of arms war for prestige, whether it's the rankings or whatever else, there's something broken there. If colleges are the one of the big answers, it's a lot of places it's not really happening right now. for?
Thank you. I'm kind of intrigued by the Amazon move, and I'd be curious to know. You keep thinking about where not the kind of deals that Jeff Bezos can get, but where's the best place to really make a difference for a large community?
Well, the Homer in me says, come to Baltimore. We could really use them. And unfortunately, Baltimore the governor of Maryland just last year killed the big transit expansion that would have been a big plus now when Amazon looks for a site. So that's too bad. I'm almost hesitant to start rooting for certain places because I find this whole process of them looking for a new home kind of obscene and grotesque, that everyone's prostrating themselves before them after years and years where they weren't even paying sales taxes, and were decimating local budgets because all the sales were suddenly not being taxed, and they've now are finally paying sales taxes in most places. Great for them, and so it's just it's all kind of grotesque right now, this process. But if I were to start getting to rooting for places, I completely would root for places that are, either in the middle of the country, like a St. Louis, or Kansas City or something like that, or places on the coast that are really hurting, like a Baltimore. But I have a bad feeling that it's going to end up being more of a winterish place.
So can we please have a round of applause for Alec MacGillis? So it is true that some things at Wallace House are changing, but we also love our traditions. And for the 32 years that we've been having this lecture, we like to honor the people who come and speak here, our former fellows, and show them how much we love them and that we want them to stay part of our family. And so this became a tradition at some point in our history of giving a bowl. Alec, this is the Hovey bowl, and it's engraved, and you can put it on your bookshelf, and the books that you write can go on either side of it, and then you can
There's only one so far, so
put your children's Michigan tchotchkes in the bowl.
Right.
Yes.
Or the sherry. Do you still do sherry?
Or the sherry that we have at Wallace House. And we also have, so the bowl, the Hovey bowl, goes home with you. And then all of our speakers' names are added to our Hovey Lecture plaque. And so you will be added here. You're added there already. Well, I actually missed that after my ball.
You're lucky I showed up.
We work fast here. Yes. So thank you for coming. So that we didn't have to